So again, welcome to our Learn at Home webinar series. It's our monthly series where we get a chance to talk about various topics of interest to our patients and their loved ones. By way of introduction, I'm Dr. Joel Salinas. I'm a behavioral neurologist. I'm also the Chief Medical Officer and co-founder here at Isaac Health. It's really nice to be in your presence here today. First off, I wanted to wish everyone a happy new year. So for today's session, we're going to be addressing a question that we commonly get in the clinic about the utility of things like games and puzzles and other activities. And so this will give us a chance to talk about all the things that can be done to keep your mind sharp, things to help to improve your quality of life and your brain health. We'll talk a little bit about what the research shows, and I'll go through a little bit about more practical tips. And as usual, at the end, we'll have an opportunity to open it up to the floor to questions. That's my favorite part of the session. So what you'll notice in your Zoom window is that there'll be a little button at the bottom that says Q&A. There's usually a little question mark there. As questions come in, feel free to tap that, add your question in there, and I'll address questions as I get through them. If any questions come up as I'm presenting, feel free to pop them in there. All right. So just to get things started, there is some research around the benefits of brain games. So there's some research that finds that there are some potential benefits, but there are also some studies that aren't quite as sure about the benefit of brain games. Overall, the research around the utility of brain games is mixed, but there is research that shows that regularly engaging in mentally stimulating activities can build something that we call cognitive reserve, something we also call cognitive resilience. And what this means is that the brain might be better able to compensate for age-related changes or disease-related change that are happening in the brain for longer. Mentally stimulating brain games might have benefits to cognition in various ways. Some of this has to do possibly with the creation of new brain cell connections that help to create a sense of almost redundancy. So basically allowing for information to still get to where it needs to get to in the brain by the creation of these pathways, regardless of whatever changes or injury might be going on. So imagine it's like if think of a highway system where cars are traveling, and each car is information going from one part of the brain to another. What these activities help to do by creating extra pathways is so that even if there's a traffic jam or kind of a faulty kind of like highway that needs to shut down, or a portion of the highway that needs to be shut down, there are always going to be lots of detours and off ramps. So that way you can still get to where you need to get to. So the information gets to where it needs to get to. Types of activities that we often talk about are things like engaging in word puzzles. That can include crossword puzzles. We often talk about jigsaw puzzles that allow you to really focus on kind of memory and motor skills and what we call visual spatial functioning. So kind of relating kind of where things are in space. For some people, it can also relate to having a calming or meditative effect. Chess or card games also are really good at things like problem solving and memory skills and strategic thinking. The one thing that I think is really important here is if you're already really good at any of these, then the potential benefit may not be as great as if you were learning something totally new. And part of the reason there is that the goal of what we're really trying to achieve here is how likely are we to create new brain cell connections? And you create more brain cell connections when you're really engaging in something new. So if you think about kind of if you've learned a new language at some point in your life, or learned a new instrument, or picked up a new skill, the first few times that you kind of practice the language, practice the skill, practice the instrument, your brain was using lots of different areas to try to figure through it and try to learn it. And over time, as it's forming new connections and refining those connections, your brain is helping to consolidate there. And over time, as you get much better and better, your brain just gets much more efficient at it. And that's kind of when you can see when you get better at the instrument, better at speaking the language, and better at the skill. And so what you want to do is actually continue to challenge yourself so you're still at the stage where you're using lots of different brain areas to form those connections. And so you can always continue to increase the level of difficulty or change the activity that you're doing so that way you are always learning and it's still really, really engaging. Um, so this is kind of this point about novelty really mattering, not just repetition. So the greatest benefits really come when this activity is new or increasingly difficult. These new experiences will help to push your brain to adapt and kind of help to promote the growth of new synaptic connections. Synapses are these connections between brain cells. And repeating the same simple puzzle or the same kind of activity will still have some benefit, but maybe not as much as if you were really challenging yourself. And if the gauge there around how challenging is that it should be challenging enough that requires effort, but it shouldn't be so challenging that you don't want to do it anymore. So relying on brain games and puzzles alone might not be sufficient to reduce risk or slow decline. Something is better than nothing, certainly, but really making sure that you're really working on these new and challenging things will help. I think the other piece here that is worth noting is in any activity that you're thinking about, the more that these activities involve other skills or other factors that can help to reduce your risk, the more powerful it'll be. So some of you may have heard me mention this before, but one of my own favorite recommendations, but not always appreciate or love recommendations, is to take on a dance class. The dance class can be really great because there's this learning component, which requires challenge. Think of it, you're learning new steps, you're learning the rhythm of the music, you're learning about kind of potential choreography, but there's also the physical activity that comes along with it. That's another factor. And then there's also the socialization piece. You have to engage people. Certainly, if you're dancing alone, there's no socialization happening. But typically in dancing, especially with dancing with partners, there's the socializing piece. And so that also helps to build kind of more things that will help to put the odds in your favor that will reduce the risk of developing cognitive issues or at least slowing the rate of decline. Um, so we want to think about all the different activities that you can do so you can really kind of max out as much as possible. So it's also something that could potentially benefit the cerebrovascular system. And that might have to do with more of like the calming effect that can come with these types of activities. But primarily it relates to these brain cell connections. When you're trying to think about what kinds of brain games to use, what kinds of things to look out for, I think it's worth noting that there is a lot of marketing out there for different types of brain games. I'm not going to name any names of any particular games, but you might have, if you've seen a commercial or an ad for it, so there's a good chance that they've had a lot of marketing. But be wary of the promises that they might make. If they're saying that they will kind of reverse changes or prevent ever the possibility of developing a cognitive issue or memory loss, I would say proceed with a little bit of caution. If the brain game has research behind it, always wonder if it's been studied in more than just one study. And in particular, if it's been done in many studies with many people in those studies. And then also what kinds of people were in those studies, whether it was people who already had memory or thinking issues or people that had no memory or thinking issues. One common issue that comes up in this area of research is something called transferability. The transferability relates to the ability to transfer the ability in the skill itself that you're learning in the brain game. So let's say the brain game is kind of memorizing locations of things or clicking a certain box at a certain time. Will that transfer to preserving your function or improving function in your day-to-day life? That's the transfer piece. And that is an area where a lot of the research around these brain games will tend to fall short, meaning that the brain games will typically show that you're getting better at the game, but will you get better at managing your finances, managing medications, solving more complex problems? That doesn't always pan out. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are some brain games that have been pretty well studied. So it's really a matter of focusing on those games that you find This relates to the second point here, games that you enjoy and that you find sufficiently challenging. So the brain games or any activities that you do that are mentally stimulating should be tough, as I said, but not so tough that you don't want to do it. You can't really advance in it. It has to really engage you and keep you coming back. And I think you can really feel that in that thrill, that draw to continue to do that game or that activity. And it feels good if you have a sense of accomplishment. That can also help with brain health, and that it helps to give a sense of meaning or purpose and can help to reduce stress. Um, and as I said, if you can, try to make it social. So any of these activities or games where you're engaging with other people, I would say that adds another boost to the potential value that's coming from that activity. There's lots of activities that you can do by yourself out there, and I think that's really fine, especially if you don't have readily access to groups. But I would say if there are other people involved, that will always generally keep it mentally stimulating, especially if it's a game of rivalry or competition, like chess or checkers or a card game. Um, uh, but anything that involves other people, even like I mentioned with dance, kind of the collaboration aspect of it, those things help to exercise more parts of your brain and can help to create more brain cell connections potentially. Um, so what other things can you do to help to stay sharp and improve your memory and thinking? There are lots of activities, not just brain games. So I gave some examples of this before. So learning a new language is a really great one. Learning to play a new instrument, even just visiting a museum or learning about a new topic can be really, really great. So, if you are someone who isn't, an engineering by trade, or you are someone who studied English, or who, worked in construction or computers, doing things outside of your typical realm will really help a ton. So this is the place to really explore and really learn something new, be curious and see kind of what can be really fun. That kind of hobby or that skill that you've been wanting to try your whole life but haven't had a chance to, this would be the opportunity to do that. Handicrafts can be a lot of fun and can be a really great opportunity. So if you've never knitted before, you can try that. There's lots of crafts that you can take, even like scrapbooking and things like that. If you haven't done any of these types of skills, that'd be great. Another one that I think can be a really real crowd pleaser is learning to cook, or learning to cook particularly new foods or recipes that you haven't done before. That can be really great, and that can introduce an opportunity to make some new friends and socialize if you get better and better at your cooking. Um, Reading a book or joining a book club can also make it social. Books can be really great. I know some people will often say, well, I have difficulty with seeing or following some of these books. There's no shame in doing audiobooks. There's increasing popularity of listening to books. And I think as long as you're learning something new, I think that can be really great. So if you're already an avid reader, and kind of a lot of what you're used to reading about is, psychological thrillers or romance novels, read a different genre. Or if you are a history buff, maybe there's an opportunity to learn about the social sciences. So really use it as like an opportunity to explore something new. And that there can be opportunities to even just attend a lecture at a local college, or there's lots of lectures and talks online that you can watch. These are also opportunities to learn. Again, the more engaging it is, the better. So just passively receiving the information is good. But if there's opportunities to ask questions, like the webinar that we're in today, or to kind of challenge your thinking when you're engaging that, I think that really helps. So quizzes and tests and things to just make sure that your learning can help even more. Um, Earlier this month, the New York Times published its 5-day brain health challenge. And this was really wonderful to see the New York Times really elevating kind of the status and awareness of brain health. So I encourage you to check that out. If you just go to the New York Times website and look up the brain health challenge, it actually walks you through different days. And you can see here that the fourth day challenge is to play a game. You'll get some helpful information there on games and suggestions that they have. Um, so to get started with the new brain game activity, make sure you set aside some time for that activity. It can be helpful to start with just 10 to 15 minutes a day, even if it's just once a week. If you try to go all in on one activity all at once, it becomes very easy to burn out or get bored of it. So set aside some time for yourself and make sure that the focus on is really the habit and the learning that you're bringing up. See how it feels when you're trying out something new. This is an opportunity to experiment. If you try something and it bores you, it wasn't really, really great, or it didn't really engage you enough, that's okay. You can work on finding something else. You can ask others, but this is an opportunity to be really creative and see what other things that you can learn out there, other skills that you've been meaning to learn. Especially if you aren't enjoying yourself, that could be a good signal that you might want to try something different. And the third thing here is to lean into the challenge. So there's been really interesting research around what people call super agers. Super agers can be defined as people who are kind of over 65, or in particular over age 80, and whose memory and thinking functions are similar to those who are in their 20s. And this kind of element of really engaging in novel, mentally stimulating activities is a common theme that's seen in people who fall into that category of superagers. And if you kind of hear their descriptions of kind of how they engage in these types of games or activities, what you often hear them say is that when they encounter a challenge, they feel a thrill, kind of like the thrill of like riding a roller coaster, or the thrill of kind of like riding a bicycle kind of downhill, that they really find it really exciting and engaging. And maybe that relates to the reward and reinforcement pathways in the brain. It's an added bit of dopamine that gets you to stick with it. But whatever it is, we see that this is something that is a consistent theme for these kind of super agers. So I really encourage you to really find where that challenge is and see how you can find enjoyment in that challenge. So that was all the content that I wanted to present today. And now I would love to move to the Q&A portion. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And I will take a look through questions that have been submitted here. And if you haven't had a chance already, again, it's that little box at the bottom that has a question mark and it says Q&A. And feel free to throw whatever question you'd like in there. I see. So the first question here is, can you recommend some brain games or recommend some games for the computer? Yeah, there are lots of games out there already. There is one brand of brain game that has some research out there. You may have heard it. It's called Lumosity. It has a package of brain games on there. Again, the key thing there is that it might not have the transferability, but if it is something that's new where you're learning and you really enjoy the challenge, I encourage you to try it out. You could also go kind of through the New York Times or some other website that has games. I know the AARP also has access to games that are free. That would be another great opportunity. If you have access to there's like usually like these sites that have like a suite of games that you can try. It can get a little bit more complicated, but you can ask for some help from a member of the team if you're interested in it. But there's a gaming kind of site called Steam that actually provides access to lots of games that you can experiment with and try. There's lots of apps out there for your phone that you can try. So, some people really like the thrill of games like Candy Crush, which I think is fine. Or some people really like Wordle. That was really popular during the pandemic. And that has that kind of thrill of having other people play with you. Give them a try, see if they benefit. There's no particular magic to any one specific game as long as it's new and it's challenging enough and you want to keep doing the game. And again, as you kind of do the game more and more, if you find yourself really engaging with it and then getting really, really good at it, and then it becomes much easier, that's an opportunity to then increase the level of difficulty if you can, or switch it up or make it more challenging for yourself in some other way. One other thing that like doesn't quite fall into the category of game, but is pretty gamified, are these language learning games or apps out there. A common one is Duolingo. I believe there's one called Babbel as well. And there's tons of these apps out there that help to teach you language. Even like American Sign Language, like any of these apps may help with also that kind of opportunity to learn new skills. I see another question here. It says, my spouse does Wordle every day. Is that helpful? They also like Sudoku. Is that good for the brain or are other games better? I think this goes back to what I was saying before. It's not always specifically the type of game or the specific game so much as it's new and enjoyable and that you're able to escalate the level of difficulty. I like that you brought up Sudoku because that is one that we hear a lot about that can help with exercising the brain. And I think it's great, especially if you're learning to play Sudoku for the first time. But if you are already a Sudoku kind of expert and you can do any Sudoku very, very quickly, that might be an opportunity to then say, let me try a different game or let me see how I can make this even more difficult for myself. Uh, Another question I see here is um, what should I do if an activity is making my loved one more frustrated? That's a great question. So if you have a loved one who has memory or thinking issues and they're playing one of these games and they're feeling frustrated, that might be a sign that you might want to try a different game that might be better suited to their level of challenge. And everybody has a different level of challenge for themselves. So an example of games out there. There's these memory games out there that have specific images more than they are kind of questions. Um, there are also like box sets that you can buy that help to challenge around memory. So that really challenge around engaging with kind of longer term memory. So if you do have a condition like Alzheimer's disease, short-term memory, kind of recent memories is where you typically will have challenge, but kind of remote memories is what we call it. So like long-term memories, memories from like where you grew up, like your hometown, or something that you did a lot of, like sciences if you were a scientist, or kind of art pieces if you were an artist. Um, there are kind of games that you can kind of tailor specifically to subject matter that you can kind of take a look at and see. This is one of the reasons why kind of art museum tours and museum tours in general can be really great because memory and things you don't necessarily they're not necessarily required to engage. So just seeing a beautiful painting and be able to say, oh, what do you see or how do you feel when you see this? Oh, how interesting that in this picture somebody is falling. What do you think happened there? Can help to engage somebody in the game regardless of kind of a person's level of memory and thinking at the time. The next question I see here is, what about if the person already has dementia and can handle learning a new topic, instrument, or skill? Yeah, I think that relates to kind of what I was mentioning, because it's finding something that they really enjoy. So you can either kind of lean back on uh, things that they've learned in the past to really engage them. I've seen things like nurses, like someone who was a nurse prior to developing these conditions, they engage in things like kind of taking care of, this is a nurse that used to work in a labor and delivery unit at a hospital, kind of using kind of baby dolls, for example, to change the babies and care for the babies, gave them something to do. So give them an activity to keep them busy that relied on something that was already kind of inherent to them. But you can find even things that don't require too much skill. So just pulling back on the skill level. So even if it's just things that are stimulating for the senses. So that's something that people can still engage with despite not having kind of a high level of memory or thinking skill. So things that there plays sounds or has colors or lights, things that have texture. So things that engage the senses that still have an element of exploration with them can be really helpful at a minimum in terms of just stimulating the brain. The next question I see here is what if my loved one isn't interested in puzzles or games at all? Yeah, that also goes back to that point of don't necessarily lean on puzzles or games. You can find something else. So like even like cooking something new, a new recipe or trying a new tool out can be really great. Putting on programs that are new and different that are interesting can be really great. Even new environments that are kind of in a setting that's feels safe and secure for that person can be really, really great. Um, Changing routes. So routine can be helpful for calming, but if you're looking for stimulation, you can try some new routes. maybe not too much of a change at times. You kind of have to gauge it with kind of where your loved one is at the time. Um, and the next question I see here, is it better to do a little bit every day or longer sessions a few times a week? Yeah, I think my suggestion here is especially if you're trying to build a habit of doing these types of activities, um, the general guidance there is focus a lot more on a little bit every day than long sessions a few times a week. Find what works best for you and your schedule, but you'll find that sometimes activities that are easy to do that you can pick up for a few minutes and still feel good about yourself when you're done doing them, you can do regularly can help a lot. That's why like there's certain apps out there again like Duolingo, and I promise I own no stock in Duolingo, um, but with Duolingo they actually help to engage you in keeping up a streak daily, and so there's a lot of systems in place to really keep you motivated to engage with it, and it makes kind of even having mistakes an okay thing. It lets you know that even if you're making mistakes, you're still learning in the process. And there's lots of different ways to engage with it. Um, there's a lot of resources out there also for the use of AI. So I encourage you to explore the use of AI. Of course, up to your level of comfort in terms of kind of how your data is shared and kind of how you interact with it and types of information that come from it. But I have seen, even if it's like practicing a new language or learning about a new skill, even with using things like a chat GPT and other kind of AI models out there where there's a voice component to it, you're able to chat with the AI bot. And it can keep you pretty engaged. And you can imagine someone who, I mean, really, it's engaging for anybody, but it can be engaging for anybody. If you have limitations in memory and thinking, that can give you an opportunity to engage with something that's stimulating, that creates a sense of conversation. And if you are a care partner, someone who's hoping to care for your loved one who is affected by one of these conditions, leaving them with an AI bot, even for a little bit, can give you a couple of minutes to take a break. Maybe you can go take a shower and prepare a meal while they're working or talking to that. Um, Another question I see here is what about supplements? Do they help with cognition? This is a great question. It's a common one that we get as well. I encourage you to also connect with your provider or your care navigator because we do have some webinars on supplements, but at a high level for supplements, there often isn't a ton of research that really supports that any one particular supplement especially helps with cognition to the point where we recommend it as a part of clinical practice. There are a lot of studies out there for very specific things. And if you look at the whole kind of ocean of scientific literature, you'll find that some studies support, some don't support, some have mixed data. The quality of the studies out there mixes quite a bit. But when I get asked about specific supplements, um, I I will usually say that if you're going to try anything, there's no harm in taking a B complex vitamin daily because it has vitamin B12, which is really good for nerve and brain cell health. And it also has vitamin B6, which also helps with kind of nerve cell kind of repair and health. You won't take too much of it because then you can start running into toxic levels of these things. But I think a kind of a simple B complex vitamin could be fine. But the goal is really to engage in a diet that really helps to meet your nutritional needs. And so something like the Mind Diet, we have another webinar on that, which is a Mediterranean and the DASH diet combination, but that's kind of lean proteins, green leafy vegetables, olive oils, dark fruit like blueberries, blackberries that are high in antioxidants, and legumes like walnuts that are high in omega-3 fatty acids can help with brain health more than any particular supplement. See, the next question I see here is, you mentioned that sleeping, diet, and socialization are important factors in brain health. Can you elaborate on diet and sleeping practices that you recommend? I just mentioned a little bit on diet. I'm always happy to go further on diet. And the goal with the diet, I would say, is it's less about um, uh, any any one specific diet. You can adhere to these things pretty moderately, and that should also help out without being super super strict. You want to enjoy life, but find things that you can the ways that you can modify your diet In that New York Times challenge, there's actually a line where I kind of suggested mindifying your diet. So finding ways that your kind of typical diet can be a little bit more diversified and can lean a little bit more Mediterranean when possible. And then on sleeping, I think the important thing with sleeping is making sure that you're getting adequate rest. If you snore, addressing things like sleep apnea is really important if you have it. There's no magic number for sleeping. Everybody's body is different, but something along the lines of about 7.5 to 8 hours is important. As we get older, we require often less sleep. But I would say addressing any major sleep issues is the key thing, and working with your provider to help to kind of give you some recommendations on that. There are lots of sleep medications out there. They don't necessarily help with better sleep quality, but they do get you to sleep. The thing there that can be helpful that doesn't affect your sleep architecture, kind of your brain activity when you're sleeping, is melatonin. So that would be one option, but there's lots of things that you can do that are non-supplement, non-drug related that can help with sleep. So I encourage you to try that out. Let's see. I didn't see any other questions here. Um, but I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who joined us today. As I said, we do these monthly, so you'll get an opportunity to provide feedback. We send these videos out through email and through our newsletter. You'll also get access to this. So we always are looking for new topics. So feel free to share that when you get your opportunity for feedback. But other than that, I wish you all a good evening, and I hope you all stay warm in the winter weather if you are in somewhere where you'll be affected by cold weather. Good night and take care. Bye bye.